Sathyabama Institute of Science and Technology.
A very good day, everyone. Myself, Preetha Wilma Dawson, Assistant Professor, College of Physiotherapy, Sathyabama Institute of Science and Technology, deemed to be a university. And yes, today's topic is about human eye. Without any further delay, let's get into the topic. Human eye is also known as bulbous oculi, which is globe-shaped with a diameter of 24 mm. Human eye consists of two segments, the anterior part and the posterior part. Anterior part, which is smaller, and it forms 1/6 of the eyeball, whereas posterior part is larger and it forms 5/6 of the eyeball. And the posterior part wall is lined by a light sensitive structure which is called retina, and the diameter of this posterior wall is about 16 mm. Next comes the orbital cavity. The eyeball is situated in a bony socket which is known as orbital cavity or eye socket. We have a very thick areolar tissue which is interposed between the eyeball and the orbital cavity. So, the eyeball is connected to the orbital cavity by the means of ocular muscles. The muscles are superior rectus, inferior rectus, lateral rectus, medial rectus, superior oblique and inferior oblique. And also the main function of this areolar tissue is to protect the eyeball from any sort of external forces. Next comes the eyelid. The major function of the eyelid is to protect the human eyeball. One more function of the eyelid is to cut off light during sleep. The opening and closing of eyeball can be done voluntarily and also reflexively. That means when a person wants to close or open the eye, it is under their control, and also in case of any foreign particles which are trying to enter the eyeball, in reflex actions the eyelids tends to close in order to protect them. On the margins of the eyeball, we have sensitive hair-like structures which are called as cilia. Each cilia arises from a follicle, and that follicle is surrounded by a sensory nerve plexus. In such case, when a foreign particle is entering, the surrounded sensory nerve plexus will be getting activated. As a result of activation, it results in the rapid blinking of eyes in order to eliminate the foreign particles which has been reached the eyelids. So, in the upper eyelids, there are about 100 to 150 cilia, whereas in the lower eyelids, there are about 50 to 75 cilia. So, we have two glands in the eyelids. One is the meibomian and the sebaceous glands. So, these glands are present near the openings of the follicles. So, when these two glands are getting infected, they will result in the formation of a condition called eye stye. So, this is called as eye stye. So, in general, the opening between the upper eyelid and lower eyelid is called as palpebral fissure. So, this palpebral fissure, the length is about 25 mm, whereas the width of the palpebral fissure is about 12 to 15 mm. So, next comes the conjunctiva. Conjunctiva is nothing but a very thin mucus layer which is surrounding only the anterior part, not the posterior part of the eyeball. So, conjunctiva is divided into two portions. So, the part covering the eyeball is called as bulbar portion, and the part of the conjunctiva which is covering the eyelid is called as palpebral portion. So, there is a sliding of this palpebral and bulbar portions. When closing of eyes and opening of eyes, these two portions will be sliding in an opposed manner. So, when two objects or two components are gliding in an opposite manner or opposite way, what happens? There will be a production of friction. So, in order to eliminate the friction, we need some sort of lubrication. And in this case, so the lubricant here is nothing but a thin tear film. So, you have a picture representation of conjunctiva. We have two parts in it. One is palpebral conjunctiva and the other one is bulbar conjunctiva. So, palpebral conjunctiva is nothing but the conjunctiva layer which is lining the eyelids is called as palpebral conjunctiva. And this bulbar conjunctiva is nothing but the conjunctiva which is lining the eyeball is called as bulbar conjunctiva. And next comes the wall of the eyeball. The eyeball is composed of three walls: the outer wall, middle wall and the inner wall. First, we will start with the outer wall. So, outer wall or outer layer is also known as tunica externa or tunica fibrosa. It includes two components. The one component is sclera and the other one is cornea. So sclera is nothing but the posterior 5/6, that is the posterior 5/6 of the eyeball is aligned externally by this component which is called sclera. It is opaque in nature. Whereas the anterior 1/6 is called as cornea, which is transparent in nature. Sclera is a tough white fibrous layer which is composed of white fibrous tissue and also along with some elastic fibers are also present there. So the posterior part of sclera has some perforations like structure where this optic nerve will be piercing it. This perforations in the sclera is called as lamina cribrosa. Next comes the cornea. So the diameter of cornea in horizontal plane is of about 12 mm, whereas in vertical plane it's about 11 mm. Cornea is a transparent convex anterior structure of the eyeball. Yes, we all know that cornea is a transparent structure, but still cornea possesses some color. It's because of the iris which is behind it giving color to it. For an example, we can take a very most famous celebrity Aishwarya Rai. Her eye color is in the green. So it does not depend on the color of the cornea. It's because of the iris which is giving color to the cornea. So cornea is a transparent structure, but still the iris lying behind it is giving color to it. In general, cornea is not a vascularized structure, but in some pathological condition, it tends to become vascularized. Next comes the middle layer of the eyeball. So middle layer of the eyeball includes three structures. The first structure is called as choroid and the second structure is ciliary body and the third structure is iris. So choroid is nothing but a very thin vascular layer of the eyeball which is lining in between the sclera and retina. It's an in-between structure between the sclera and retina. And then we have the ciliary body. It is the thickened anterior part of the human eyeball, whereas iris is a curtain-like structure. It's a colored curtain-like structure. So it is present in the front of the lens and there is a small opening in the front of the iris that is called as pupil. Next comes the inner layer of the eyeball. The inner layer of the eyeball is also known as tunica interna or tunica nervosa. It is a very important layer. In the inner layer, we have only one structure that is called as retina. So retina is a very delicate light sensitive membrane. It extends from the lateral part of the optic disc and ends near behind the ciliary body. So in general, retina has many receptors for vision. Example, cones, rods. These are the very main important receptors which are responsible for visual perception. And in general, it is made up of 10 layers. So next comes the structure called fundus oculi. Fundus oculi is present in the posterior part of the internal eyeball. So fundus oculi consists of two structures. The first structure is called as optic disc and the next structure is called as macula lutea with fovea centralis. So let's see what is optic disc. Optic disc is also known as optic papillae. It is always generally referred as blind spot. Why it is referred as blind spot? It's because in optic disc we don't have any rods and cones. So when it is a very insensitive structure to light. Because of this, optic disc is called as a blind spot. And next comes macula lutea. In macula lutea, we have all the layers of retina, but all the layers of retina tends to be very thin in the region of fovea centralis. It's about only 0.5 mm in diameter. So next comes the intraocular fluid. Intraocular fluid is nothing but the fluid which is present in the eyeball. This fluid is mainly responsible to maintain the contour, that is the shape of the eyeball. So we have two intraocular fluids. One is vitreous humour and the other one is aqueous humour. So vitreous humour is viscous fluid, that is it has a thick consistency, whereas aqueous humour is a very thin fluid like structure. This is present between the space between the lens and the retina. We have a space between the lens and retina. There we can find this vitreous humour. Whereas this aqueous humour is present between the iris and the cornea. So this can be divided into two components. The first component in aqueous humour is called as anterior chamber and the posterior chamber. So the connection between the anterior chamber and posterior chamber of the aqueous humour is done by the structure called pupil. So these two structures are mainly responsible to maintain the contour and also to maintain the pressure of the eye, that is called as intraocular pressure. Thank you.